Good morning, everybody, and welcome over to our stream today. So happy to be back after a prolonged absence here. I feel like there's so much to talk about, per usual, over in the world of comic books. This past week, frankly, was particularly exciting, even though we say that like nearly each and every week, mainly because the X-Men's Raid on Greymalkin crossover just went ahead and kicked off. I think some of the first issues from the adjectiveless X-Men was just so much fun here. I think we're going to talk about that really exhaustively later on in the stream. To open some of these streams, I always enjoy talking about comic books that I don't necessarily have the time to give a full review to. This week, I want to go ahead and zero in on the latest issue of NYX Chapter 6. For me, this is a really great series made up of some of the really interesting cast members with people like Sophie Cuckoo, Anol, Prodigy, Kamala Khan, but also I have to hand it to the creative team for all the creative ways that they're able to really display the story here. This issue, curiously enough, actually shift up the artwork towards Michael Shelfer. And I found that his style, especially in the context of the first couple pages, was just really gorgeous. And also was able to evoke just a slightly different context than what we see from some of the usual art for the series. Also, that first page as well has just a beautiful sense of color coming in from colorist Raul Angulo over on the series here. Plus, there's an interesting thematic tie that introduces a fascinating character from Laura Kinney's past who actually shows up towards the end of this comic book. Plus, there's really interesting involvement with figures like Mojo, who are key members of the X-Men worlds. I think it's quite interesting how Marvel like repeatedly tries to move the character of Kamala Khan closer and closer to Mojo. I'd love to see like a really direct encounter between some of these figures as well. I think some of the characterization with figures like Prodigy and Anol has been really great. It can be really difficult to write some of these characters who are just so niche and specific. But I found that over the course of some of these latest NYX chapters, just the characterization for these two figures in particular seems to be fleshed out in a really interesting way. One of my favorite things about NYX so far is it's really compelling to me how Prodigy at first was trying to, not be a part of the NYX, but as the series goes on, it feels like he's more and more integral to the team over time. I hope this direction continues moving forward. I hope, some of these characters are a little bit more reluctant. Also, towards the last couple pages here, I really love the interaction between Laura and the character of Fixer. Of course, Laura and the local character. And of course, the local's ties over to Mojo is really what makes him such a harrowing villain over the course of the issue. However, this installment, towards the last couple pages, actually gives readers like more of an emotional connection with this character too. So I really have to hand it to NYX with how deep they're going on the characterization for not only some of the human characters in the core team, but also some of the villains comprised throughout the series. I hope this comic book just continues to have that really interesting and quirky tone and also continues to be a really fascinating and edgy book among the NYX line. This issue didn't quite have as much of it, but one thing we've really enjoyed about this book previously are all the ties this comic series had to Krakoa with figures like Julian Keller and the Hellion. So I'm just still head over heels for NYX. I know it's more of a niche comic book, and right now in the X-Men's From the Ashes line, they've just been publishing so many series. But if you haven't checked it out, I think it's one of the very best among the entire line. Okay, without further ado, let's go ahead and get our stream going today. My name is Arakko Braddock, and I want to officially welcome you aboard to just a stacked week of comic books. We've been hyping up the X-Men's Raid on Greymalkin series for a considerable amount of time now. It's a crossover shared between the main adjectiveless X-Men series and the sister comic book Uncanny X-Men, featuring Rogue and Cyclops teams coming together to try and raid the Greymalkin prison. The Greymalkin prison is none other than Dr. Karina Ellis's twisted version of the Xavier's haunted mansion that she's turning into a prison, along with some of her associates like Dr. Philip Scurvy and the really deadly Captain Ezra. We've seen these characters kind of shuffling in the background of so many previous X-Men issues, and I really found that finally, in the latest issue of the adjectiveless X-Men, we got to see some of these characters in action, which is really, really cathartic for me because for such a long time, figures like Beast have been shrouded in so much mystery, and I've also been wondering at what point, Cyclops and Rogue directly fight against Dr. Ellis and some of those forces here. Elsewhere, I mean, the main adjectiveless X-Men series wasn't the only comic book this week that was absolutely stellar. The main Ultimates comic book, Ultimates issue 7, was such a fantastic character piece. I really found that author Dennis Camp is doing such a great job picking up from Ultimate Invasion, where author Jonathan Hickman left off. This is more of a character-focused book as time has gone on. I think eventually it'll probably shift more towards the plot when the Maker comes back. But at this point, I'm just loving the characterization of figures like, the Ultimate She-Hulk, figures like Iron Lad, and just watching these characters pick up the pieces after their incredibly deadly fight with the Iron Fist and some of the immortal weapons over the last issue of the Ultimates was absolutely stellar. In fact, let's go ahead and kick off today's content with a quick review of Ultimates issue 7. All right, so here we go. This is the latest chapter of Ultimates here. I love this cover. I think it shows off so many of the key figures across this comic book. As we previously mentioned, this one is written by Dennis Camp, featuring artwork from Juan Frigeri. I think the art in this book is just absolutely stellar. There's so much subtext in the background of this series, and I just think Frigeri does a great job pulling on it across so much of Dennis Camp's writing. I know I mentioned this earlier, but I'm just shocked to see how much characterization Camp is able to lend to all these figures across the series. I love some of the animosity that this new version of a Hawkeye has towards some of the other characters, but at the end of the day, watching him team up with the rest of the Ultimates characters is a ton of fun across this series. In the final couple pages, they did a great job reintroducing Iron Lad over to the comic book too, as he's had just a brief absence in some recent comic book issues. So I'm just absolutely shocked at how much I'm enjoying the core Ultimate series. I would say across the entire Ultimates line, definitely Ultimate X-Men is still my favorite, but this one just continues to exceed my expectations issue after issue. Before we head over to the next comic book, I also want to quickly mention here that author Dennis Camp has done a great job in terms of the pacing for the Ultimates. We had one issue featuring a really climactic battle between our Ultimates characters and the Iron Fist. And then in this next one, we're filling in some of the characterization and filling in the individual pieces behind what makes these figures interesting. So, man, I just can't wait to see what Dennis Camp is going to work on after Ultimates. I'd love to see him stick with the Ultimate Universe series, for the long run and really flesh out maybe more than just one team of characters. We're definitely going to be talking about this a little bit later, but author Jed MacKay right now is in charge of both the Avengers and the Adjectiveless X-Men series. And the amount of continuity he's able to really just work with across these two comic books is staggering. I think it'd be really interesting if maybe Dennis Camp ultimately had more control of the line moving forward, because I just don't think you can argue the immense quality of the Ultimates comic book. Afro SF, really fantastic to have you over in chat. Afro SF says, I haven't read this issue yet. I knew Iron Lad couldn't be dead. Indeed. I didn't really want to give away the spoiler, but come on. I mean, Iron Lad is in the cover. He's going to be on the cover of some future Iron Man or Ultimates comic books we're going to talk about later in the stream. We have plenty of Iron Lad content over in the future of the Ultimates line. Let's see. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our next comic book issue. I think this one is going to be one of the most decisive series we have to talk about today. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into, yeah, one of our very most important comic books over for the stream today. This is going to be the Adjectiveless X-Men series issue 8, which finally kicks off the Raid on Greymalkin crossover that we've teased so extensively on our previous live streams. As we mentioned in the intro here, Dr. Ellis has turned the Xavier Institute into a prison for some of these X-Men characters, but we haven't really gotten to see many of the after effects. We've seen so many like brief instances of Cyclops and Rogue interacting with Dr. Ellis, which is really interesting because these are the two figures that are in charge of like the core X-Men teams with Rogue's X-Men over in Louisiana, as well as Jed McKay's X-Men in Merle, Alaska, across the comic book tale. However, this is Adjectiveless X-Men, which puts Cyclops to the forefront. So Cyclops officially goes and tries to rescue his friend Beast, who's been captured in previous issues by some of these figures. I love the first two opening pages kicking off the comic book, really teasing Beast's updated status quo in the series. And also, I think Jed McKay has done a great job just pulling on so much characterization for Beast across this issue, referencing some of the continuity, from the latest X-Force series, and just giving Beast like a new outlook that causes a lot of conflict in terms of his character. I don't think we've mentioned the creative team on this one yet, unfortunately. This one written by Jed McKay, featuring artwork from Ryan Stegman. Ryan Stegman is not an artist I usually prefer in terms of visuals. I usually prefer artists who are much more like refined in terms of the line, but I really found that Stegman was able to pull up the tension on this comic book and really create these excellent scenes between these characters that had, just so much subtext in terms of the character emotions. When Beast meets up with figures like the character of Jubilee and Calico, I really feel this sense of joy that these characters both have when they're first meeting each other. But that sense of joy is quickly evaporated when Dr. Ellis goes in the mix and creates a really violent scenario over for these characters. Over in the background, too, it's really great to see the remaining figures of the Adjectiveless X-Men who aren't officially captured in the series come into battle with Dr. Ellis. The way that the X-Men actually come together and stage their fight is really interesting. I don't want to spoil it too much because we've done so much, hyping up across these two separate teams. Maybe one of the final things we have to mention before we head over to some of our next content here is just the fact that there's all this animosity that's been teased between Rogue and Cyclops in previous issues of the main Adjectiveless X-Men and Uncanny X-Men comic book series. This all comes to a head in some of the final moments of the Adjectiveless X-Men issue 8, and I think it was also characterized in a way that brought a ton of tension over to the comic book. I'm absolutely staggered at the results of this first chapter here. I think the pacing, once again, here is just incredibly solid, and we have a great way to draw some of the battle lines officially now on Raid on Greymalkin. Okay, we actually have more Greymalkin coverage. I just need to go ahead and find it. Give me just one moment here. Let's see. There we go. I think I've got it now. Let's double check. Excellent. Okay, so the fun with Raid on Greymalkin doesn't even stop there. We have a preview of the next issue, but before I do that, I just want to go ahead and check in on some of these other chatters. Okay, perfect. It looks like we're all caught up here with chat. Let's go ahead and preview the upcoming Uncanny X-Men issue, the second installment of the Raid on Greymalkin series that was just published over here from comicbook.com over on December 5th by Tim Adams. Gambit packs a recognizable artifact from the Marvel Cinematic Universe in part 2 of the new X-Men crossover. Thanks to Channing Tatum, Remy LeBeau got a boost in popularity over the summer when he finally debuted as the Raging Canadian in Deadpool and Wolverine. It's an exciting time to be an X-Men fan, with the first post-Krakoa crossover beginning in Raid on Greymalkin. So we already did a great job, I think, setting up some of the adjectiveless X-Men and Cyclops over in the main series. Now we're going to switch over to the second chapter and really check in on the character of Rogue and what some of the Outliers characters are going to respond to the Raid on Greymalkin threat. Comicbook.com has the exclusive preview of Uncanny X-Men issue 7 by Gail Simone, David Marquez, Edgar Salazar, Victor Olazaba, Matthew Wilson, and VC's Clayton Cowles. It picks up an hour before the action begins in Raid on Greymalkin as Rogue and Cyclops discuss the particulars via cell phone. Man, I really have to hand it to Marvel's editorial. I think they've done a great job just characterizing the animosity between these different series across, like, just, really different timelines over in the comic books. Raid on Greymalkin, the first chapter in the adjectiveless X-Men series, did a great job pushing the plot forward, even though Uncanny X-Men is rewinding time a little bit in this preview that we're going to take a look at. I think some of the dynamics teased really enhance my overall enjoyment of the story here. Both Rogue and Cyclops have had members of their teams abducted and taken to Greymalkin Prison, the former Xavier Institute for Higher Learning. Understandably, they're both itching to take the fight to Greymalkin Prison and its warden, Dr. Ellis. Yeah, I feel like Dr. Ellis's conflict is starting to get really personal with the character of Rogue, especially because she recently dispatched the character of Sarah Gaunt against Rogue, who Rogue recently was able to form like a pretty strong connection with across the comic book series. The only problem is they are having a difference of opinion on how to best tackle their joint problem. Cyclops wants Rogue and her team to sit this one out while his X-Men try to free their friends. He feels that if both teams attack the Greymalkin prison, it'll only cause bloodshed. Plus, it'll come off as an act of war, and mutants are in a very precarious place after the fall of X. Rogue isn't hearing this, however, and offers a warning to Cyclops to not get in her way. Next, Rogue, Gambit, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler get ready to leave with the new mutants they've taken under their wing. The only problem is how they're going to get from Louisiana to Westchester. Luckily, Gambit has the Eye of Agamotto on hand to open up a portal for them. Okay, I absolutely love this cover on Uncanny X-Men issue 7 from David Marquez. We featured it in so many different thumbnails over on recent streams here. The way it combines and really teases the animosity between Rogue and Cyclops' different teams on this series just tease a really interesting sense of cohesion for the X-Men line too. Okay, let's go ahead and check on some of the interiors from David Marquez and Edgar Salazar in the chapter. This first page features a phone conversation between Cyclops and Rogue, teasing the tension and how they both are trying to respond to the Greymalkin threats. Right now, Rogue is like in a desperate panic because she recently lost two of her own members, to Dr. Ellis's Greymalkin prison, and really wants to respond immediately. Cyclops continues to tell her to hold back, while in the meantime, Rogue is just trying to burst at the seams and really go into action with the rest of the X-Men characters. Cyclops explains that the reason why he doesn't want Rogue to go with him is because he doesn't want to start an act of war on Greymalkin Prison. If you ask me, I think that's a little bit silly because right now Greymalkin, has three separate X-Men, members from actually different teams here. So it feels like at some point, there is going to have to be war drawn between the X-Men and Dr. Ellis, especially because she's previously taken the X-Men's home in some previous issues too. I love this next interior page. I think, David Marquez really teases out some of the tension in this conversation, once again here between Rogue and Cyclops. One of the really interesting things about this preview that we're looking at too is I really thought that Rogue as a character was going to be the one who was going to stick with Professor Xavier's dream. In some previous articles involving Radon Greymalkin, I'm not sure if it was Gail Simone or one of the other maybe authors across this series, but they were definitely hinting that one of the characters between Rogue and Cyclops didn't believe in Professor Xavier's dream any longer. And I just naturally assumed it would have been Cyclops due to some of the animosity he's had with Professor Xavier in the past. But it turns out that Rogue is actually the one who's trying to go out, strike out, and just do things on her own way moving forward. I think probably a lot of this is stemming from some of the PTSD that a lot of our mutant characters are harboring from Krakoa. And, once again, I love the fact that there's so much, subtext built up for the characterization for some of these figures. So I can just reach back into the previous run to be informed on, some of the current mindscapes of these characters too. Okay, on this next page, we really get to see the Outliers teaming up with the Louisiana X-Men, getting ready to take matters into their own hands and fight their side of the raid on Greymalkin here. One interesting to note about these preview pages is that Gambit still has the Eye of Agamotto that he was able to seize, I believe, in the first issue of Uncanny X-Men. It's been interesting to see how much Gail Simone in Marvel's editorial has managed to sneak that plot device across some of the comic book issues. Gambit really uses it on this last page to teleport the X-Men over to the Greymalkin prison. Yeah, I was trying to hint at this earlier, but this comic book kind of rewinds the time right before Cyclops' raid and just informs why Rogue and her team were fighting as well in the background of this series. This is a gorgeous page over from David Marquez. I love the sense of design and symmetry, and the way that Gambit is opening up that portal is just really, really striking in terms of the colorization here too. So great stuff across this preview on Raid on Greymalkin. I couldn't be happier with the X-Men line right now. I feel like these brand new villains with Dr. Ellis and Captain Ezra and Philip Scurvy, I think they're all really compelling right now. The animosity drawn between Rogue and Cyclops is also pretty interesting. It doesn't really feel forced or staged. This is only a 4-part crossover, so I feel like it's going to be done before we're able to even get tired of the series overall. So really fantastic stuff in terms of Marvel's Dual X-Men series. I hope they continue to be as cohesive as they are. And I'm excited to see what's next after Raid on Greymalkin. I'm curious to see if we're going to see some of the threats from the Adjectiveless X-Men series involving, the mysterious 3K group and Cassandra Nova. I know those are some huge figures that are just looming in the background of the X-Men line that nobody has dealt with yet, because it really feels like Dr. Ellis is trying to make so many aggressive moves against the X-Men. But really, really fantastic stuff here. I could not be happier with this line, even though we've gone from the transition from Krakoa to From the Ashes. At this point, we are in the middle of our first crossover, and I feel like there's really, really great success. Comparing this to Ten of Swords, one of the earlier crossovers in terms of Krakoa, this one is a lot more streamlined, a lot more focused, and has had a lot more, foreshadowing and subtext across different issues too. So, yeah, really, really tremendous stuff. I hope the next X-Men crossover is a little bit more bold and a little bit more ambitious, but still, I think this is just a great first crossover and way to connect these X-Men books together. Sometimes when we sit there and we just hype up those comic books over on our stream, I'm really terrified that they're not going to meet the expectations. And, seeing something that delivers X-Men 8 and that preview for Uncanny X-Men 7 really does a great job, directly confronting some of my fears regarding the series and just the overall line for the X-Men. Okay, let's talk about a surprise comic book that I've just enjoyed more and more and more as time has gone on. It's a series that we actually started covering really prior to issue 1 on the channel, but one that I think has gotten better as each issue has progressed here. Let's go ahead and talk about the latest issue of Avengers 21. This one actually combines the Avengers and X-Men characters together in a really interesting setting towards the Avengers actually towards the X-Men's factory over in Merle, Alaska. So I really like the modern Avengers team over in the tail. I do feel like they're a little bit more affiliated to Marvel Cinematic Universe than I would like. However, I think the saving grace of Avengers 21 is the fact that the adjectiveless X-Men are also featured in this comic book, and they're just such interesting, lovable weirdos here with people like, Quentin Quire, Juggernaut, Magic, Psylocke, and the really dark version of both Cyclops and Beast here. Watching our Avengers figures head over to Morrill, Alaska, and really establish some of their relationships between the Avengers and the adjectiveless X-Men was a blast in this series. Actually, in the solicits for this chapter of X-Men, they were teasing that there may be a little bit of Avengers versus X-Men in this title. However, it seems like these two teams actually came together for, a nice issue, enjoying some of the scenery of the series. In my opinion, I really think this comic book hopefully is set before the Raid on Greymalkin crossover. I don't think it does a good job connecting overall to Raid on Greymalkin. However, it does feature just some great characterization. One really fun thing that opens the series is the baseball game that the Avengers and X-Men characters are having together. This is a ton of fun because the aspects of baseball has been teased in so many previous X-Men issues, and bringing the Avengers in the middle of it just makes it so much more endearing across the tale. Valerio Schiti is so good at some of the facial expressions in this comic book, but he's equally as adept in terms of some of these layouts. There's so many bold, panel bleeds. There's so many interesting layouts that really capture just so much motion across some of these pages here too. Ultimately, I think one of my very favorite things about this issue of Ultimately, I think one of my very favorite things about this issue of Avengers is how much characterization it lends specifically towards Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, and Cyclops, Scott Summers. The way that these two characters address some of their hard feelings towards each other and the politics of these two teams is really interesting. One thing that's definitely helping this Avengers series and the adjectiveless X-Men is the fact that author Jed MacKay is actually writing both comic books. So I feel like if you're in charge of these two disparate teams, you can do a much stronger job balancing some of the plot points and just the overall direction of how these two comic books cross over into each other. So this was a fantastic issue of Avengers. It's actually kind of like a standalone issue that you can pick up even if you haven't read some previous chapters. If you want to see some great characterization and really get to know the really interesting adjectiveless X-Men team made up of really fascinating figures like, Temper and Quentin Quire, I really think Avengers 21 is probably the comic book for you. This was such a massive week of Marvel comic books. My God. Okay, this one I actually had the chance to cover on the channel because it was just too much fun not to. We're just going to talk about it really briefly here. But my goodness, the all new Venom coming in from Al Ewing and artist Carlos Gomez, is just so much fun. Watching Al Ewing tease some of these potential symbiote candidates for this all new Venom figure was a really compelling. Author Al Ewing has done a tremendous job balancing some of the final plot elements of the Venom War series and then just following up on them really, really quickly in some of the overall plot threads from All New Venom. One of my very favorite things about this comic book in particular was how it really featured like a more street approach to the Marvel Universe, featuring some of these kind of like Defenders adjacent characters with figures like Luke Cage. Some of our suspects are comprised of Luke Cage, Rick Jones. We also have, let's see here, Madam Mask and Robbie Robertson. So it was really compelling over in All New Venom, watching some of these characters interact with each other and try and figure out who the ultimate culprit is behind this brand new Venom symbiote. Also, I love in the background of this series how some of the Venom War plot threads are being teased. More specifically, I found it really compelling how Dylan has lost his own symbiote as a result of the Venom War, and it's now being bonded with a different figure who we don't have access to. This actually really strongly reminds me of when Jane Foster first became Thor because nobody initially knew who she was. She grabbed the hammer on the moon and then she continued to just waltz around Asgard repeatedly. I really hope Marvel kind of teases the direction of this figure and doesn't give it away too early. I hope Al Ewing continues to tell a compelling mystery for who the all new Venom actually is. And I'm just really, really floored with how Al Ewing has managed the Venom series overall. The core Venom comic book really feels like a huge science fiction story, while All New Venom is more of like a grounded street approach to Marvel's overall Venom series. So yeah, moving forward here, I really hope Al Ewing as a writer is able to manage all these disparate elements of Venom and continue to make All New Venom as interesting and captivating as it truly can be here. Okay, let's go ahead and shift gears just a little bit. And let's check out the future of the Ultimate Comics line. So Marvel actually teased a ton of solicits for some upcoming series here. I really want to go ahead and check them out. These are going to be comic books on sale this upcoming February. And yeah, we have comic books like Ultimate Black Panther, Ultimate Spider-Man. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Ultimate Wolverine Unleashed, Luke Cage stages the ultimate prison break and more in upcoming Ultimate issues. This one was published a while ago on November 20th, but I'm still finding in this article that there's a lot of comic book news that we haven't talked about yet. So I really want to take a look at what Marvel has in store for the future of the line here. Yeah, we definitely haven't looked at these yet. Just as a reminder, the last issue of Ultimates that was published was Chapter 7. We're going to take a look right now at the ninth issue of the series. This one is still written by Dennis Camp. It actually features a different artist this time with Chris Allen. And take a look at that gorgeous cover over from Dyke Ruan. I'm loving the way that all the bars are juxtaposed in the background on Iron Lad's face. I'm wondering if this could be potentially a different armor for Iron Lad 2. Also, is that the introduction of the brand new Ultimate Luke Cage? I'm definitely intrigued here. Let's check out our solicit. Luke Cage in the Ultimate Prison Break, Stormbreaker and innovative artist Chris Allen joins Dennis Camp to bring us the history and the future of Luke Cage. Spider-Man isn't the only success story of Ultimates 1.0. Meet the man who has been quietly sabotaging the Maker's Council from behind bars. This is a new revelation for me. I had no idea that Ultimate Luke Cage was stemming in the background of the Marvel Universe. I didn't know that he's potentially staging a prison break and is trying to sabotage the Maker's operations behind the scenes. I'm loving just how complicated this premise and idea is. And my goodness, I can't wait to check out where Ultimates is headed moving forward. This one is on sale February 5th. And yeah, just can't wait to see how the Ultimates is going to continue before we head into the big storyline with the Maker coming up really soon. Okay, I'm curious to check in on the latest issue of Ultimate Black Panther. Particularly, I'm interested to see if this comic book is going to move away from Black Panther's fight with Moon Knight that has had such a big focus on in nearly each and every issue of this series. Let's check out the February 19th Ultimate Black Panther 13 solicit. This one's still written by Brian Hill, featuring art and cover from Stefano Caselli. One really interesting thing to mention is that this creative team has been sticking with the book for quite a long time now. I'm really happy that Marvel has just continued to feature these creative teams on these core books, publishing brand new content. Ultimate Black Panther Year 2 starts here. With Moon Knight defeated? Oh, good. Okay, fantastic, fantastic. This series is finally able to move beyond the Moon Knight figure and put T'Challa in a different position moving forward in the long run. I think it's a good idea to tell a slow burn story featuring, Black Panther going up against the Moon Knight figures. But ultimately, I was really curious at what Ultimate Black Panther was bringing to the comic book series next. Let's see what's in store for Ultimate Black Panther here. T'Challa must learn the secrets of vibranium because his very life and soul are at risk. The Sorcerer Supreme can help understand the truth of the terrifying element that built Wakanda, but her aid comes with a price. I'm hoping that the results of the vibranium that they're teasing and this solicit for Ultimate Black Panther actually has like some repercussions on the series. I hope it's kind of clear because I think some of the lore in Black Panther can be a little bit hard to follow at times. And I'm liking some of the ideas that this solicit is teasing. It just needs to make sure that it's going to be communicated to the audience in a very clear way. But really think there's some fascinating stuff behind Ultimate Black Panther, and I'm happy to see this series moving past their very first long form arc here. Okay, let's go ahead and check out one of my most contentious comic books that I have with the community here. This is Ultimate Spider-Man Chapter 14, written by Jonathan Hickman, featuring art from Marco Cicchetto. Ultimate Spider-Man I've had such a hard time with, just as a result of the series featuring so many character relationships that we've seen played out in other Spider-Man stories. Unfortunately, from what I can see just from the cover alone on the 14th issue, sticking Spider-Man in a storyline with Kraven the Hunter feels a little bit redundant to me, as has like each and every issue of Ultimate Spider-Man to date. The series, I believe, recently introduced Gwen Stacy, and now it has kind of, some additional characterization with, I believe, Harry Osborn, who's back to the Green Goblin. So overall here, I'm just kind of shocked at the direction Jonathan Hickman has gone with this series. I feel like in so many of his past works, he's always pushed the continuity to the limit. Some of the elements of the background with the ties to the Maker's Council redeems Ultimate Spider-Man for me a little bit, but I'm still shocked at the low level of ambition for the overall series and just the lack of new and original ideas that really help shepherd the Ultimate line with Ultimate Universe. If this series can just add some new or different elements overall to the comic book and feature some different continuity, I would absolutely still be on board. I definitely do not have a vendetta against, Jonathan Hickman. However, I do think it's really interesting to note that a lot of Hickman's most recent work, I feel, doesn't have the same quality as what we were experiencing just a few years ago. In fact, I'm really nervous about maybe the future of his writing as a whole at Marvel. I'm wondering if he's ever going to be able to take on a story like as ambitious as Ultimate Universe again, and if he's still going to be in charge of shepherding like this big Ultimate event that's been teased across so many different comic books. Okay, let's go ahead and check in with chat. Afro SF, I enjoy Ultimate Spider-Man. I want to see if Ben and Jonah learn about the Maker. Okay, that's super interesting. It seems like Ben and Jonah are kind of getting closer to the Maker. I believe right now they have their own news operation. Because initially, I believe the Daily Bugle was bought out by Kingpin, who's associated with the Maker's Council, causing these two characters to leave. So again, I love some of the bones of this series, but I can't quite tell if this comic book has enough individual elements to bring it forward and make like a new, basically a new Spider-Man story that I'm interested in reading. And the ironic part is that right now, Ultimate Spider-Man is telling a storyline that's very familiar, and the main Amazing Spider-Man series is going like guns forward, featuring a storyline with Spider-Man really closely associated with Doctor Doom. So, I know that I know that a lot of people have the feeling right now that Ultimate Spider-Man is the weaker across the two comic books of Amazing Spider-Man and Ultimate Spider-Man, but the pacing of Amazing Spider-Man and just the sheer ambition of the series overall, even as it's shepherded from Zeb Wells over to Joe Kelly, I think is undeniable. I think the first couple issues have been so much fun, and just the Eight Deaths of Spider-Man story for me has just been absolutely wild. Okay, this next cover is really, really cool. I think this is a comic book that has a ton of potential. A really interesting creative team, too. This is Ultimate Wolverine Chapter 2. This series still hasn't yet debuted. One of the really interesting things about this core comic book is the fact that it's sticking the character of Ultimate Wolverine really close to the Maker. So this character has even been teased as the Maker's kind of Winter Soldier and the assassin of the Maker too. Let's learn what we can read about the solicit for the second issue of the series. The Maker's Council and their ultimate weapon. Colossus, Omega Red, and Magic put Ultimate Wolverine to the test by seeing how well he handles the opposition, a group fighting for mutant liberation. Okay, so Colossus, Omega Red, and Magic, at this point, we know are all part of the Maker's Council. Maybe the Ultimate figurine, or excuse me, maybe the Ultimate Wolverine character is a little bit new in terms of Marvel's continuity, because they're trying to test him specifically on how he's trying to handle the mutant opposition. Frankly, at some point, I know Ultimate Wolverine is definitely going to have to go up against the Ultimates. I'd be really impressed if issue 2 was actually the one that pit these characters against each other. I feel like it might be a little bit too soon, but these books at this point are definitely on a collision course, and I feel like it's only a matter of time before we see Ultimate Wolverine battle against Iron Lad in the very near future. Super compelling stuff right now. I really hope the Ultimate Universe continues to have that slow burn element so that when they finally do introduce the Maker, it's going to bring as much tension to the series as possible. Okay, let's talk about one of my very, very favorite comic books across the Marvel Ultimate line, one that feels very distinctive among some of the other series. Of course, we're talking about Ultimate X-Men. It looks like the new chapter is 12. It's on sale February 26th, featuring both writing and art from Peach Momoko. Okay, I just caught a really small glimpse at the solicit. It seems really interesting. It's finally going to feature a showdown with some of our Ultimate X-Men and the Shadow King, who's been teased across so many disparate issues of X-Men. Kageyama has been such a fascinating figure. He's brought in this really harrowing element to the X-Men property, and I love how dark his relationship with Surge continues to get over time, and how the Children of the Atom cult just continues to use Kageyama as their weapon and strip away so much of his free will. So the rest of the characters across the series continue to be incredibly compelling. I believe we have the new Psylocke down there with Hisako Ichiki armor, Maystorm, Nico Minoru. We have Surge in the background. Not sure if that's Kageyama. And Mori and Natsu too. Wow, this iconography in the background featuring the Children of the Atom Cult is also just absolutely beautiful. I'm loving the sideways cover to the comic book too. I really want to see Peach Momoko continue to imbue as much ambition as she can into the Ultimate X-Men line. Okay, finally, let's read off our solicit here and see what other plot elements Peach Momoko is bringing to the X-Men. Maystorm leads her team of masked mutants in a climactic battle against Shadow King, but the confrontation leads to a huge rift between best friends Maystorm and Armor. Yeah, these two figures have been central to the overall X-Men line. I think it's going to be really sad, watching a little bit of conflict between these two characters. Also, I'm wondering how this is going to ripple into some of the relationships with the other X-Men members who are kind of forming out of the limelight with people like Nico Minoru, Mori, and Natsu, and some of these other figures as well. In one of the latest issues of Ultimate X-Men, just the confrontation with Surge was absolutely heartbreaking. I feel like eventually Surge is probably going to defect from her villainous past and head over to the Ultimate X-Men. I'm just wondering how soon it's going to take place in the overall comic book series. AfroSF says, I'm very impressed by Peach Momoko. I honestly didn't expect her to do 12 issues with no fill-in artist. That is a fantastic point. That's a fantastic point. Honestly, too, I think one of the other elements of Ultimate X-Men that continues to engage me as just an overall reader of this series is really just how it's managed to feature so much really settled characterization. In this series, we continue to glimpse at some of the backstories of the individual characters and just seeing Surge's family life and some of the tension between Hisako and Maystorm's family life in the background as well has really made me more acclimated to these characters than I ever thought I would. And I just really hope that Momoko continues writing comic books in this direction. I definitely think it's paying off. And I'm just really curious to see how all these characters are finally going to combine to fight against the Maker in the very near future. Okay, we still have some really fun X-Men stuff to talk about. Give me just a moment here, and then we're going to jump into a really fun news story. We're still a little bit behind here. We're catching up on a lot of articles that Marvel wrote over in November. On November 21st, they came out with some solicits teasing the upcoming issues of Amazing Spider Man. Let's go ahead and check out the X-Men joining Spider-Man's fight against Sidorak in the upcoming chapters of 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Learn about February's issues of 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, including Amazing Spider-Man, 68 Point Deaths, a bonus issue by Christos Gage and Mark Buckingham. Nobody except me. Good to have you in chat. They are really knocking this new Ultimate stuff out of the park. I agree. I read some of the first couple issues of the previous Ultimate line. I stuck with Ultimate Spider-Man for a really long time. I feel like all this material is probably more compelling from the first launch due to the fact that they have a big and massive, overall status quo with the Maker looming across so many different series in the line. I'd love to see Marvel continue to have this approach with other like line-wide series. Right now, the Uncanny X-Men and Main X-Men series have also done just an absolutely phenomenal job of featuring so much cohesion in the line. One really interesting thing to note for me is that I've definitely fallen off of DC Comics a little bit, and I feel like that's due in large part to the continuity not staying specific or not staying intact between some of these different comic books. In particular, I'm really dismayed at the fact that Marvel brought the Justice League back and took the spotlight away from the Titans. And just somehow, some way, I feel like Marvel's X-Men and Spider-Man series have just featured a lot more cohesion across the line and have brought a lot more continuity. I think that's part of the reason why I've stayed really loyal to Marvel and featured so much Marvel content is I just don't feel like we're starting over every couple years, which is really, really nice. This new Amazing Spider-Man series has a big and radical new direction. It has a really wild and ambitious premise. However, it still features a lot of the same supporting cast that Zeb Wells set up over in his run, and is really just incrementally bringing the supporting cast forward. I love this overall approach to the line. I hope, frankly, I hope even more of Marvel's comic books are written in the same style, and I'd love to see DC take this direction moving forward too. Man, I just took a look at the first paragraph I was going to read, and it references the previous Blood Hunt storyline, which, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of, in terms of the cohesion, I'm definitely glad to see that Marvel is using, individual stories to set up brand new ideas that they're using in other comic books. As we mentioned earlier, I really hope they continue telling stories in this same direction. I think it makes things really, really interesting. Following Bloodhunt, Doctor Doom is Sorcerer Supreme, and one of his first mandates was tasking Spider-Man to be the new champion against the 8 Scions of Sidorak in 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Spearheaded by superstar creators Joe Kelly and Ed McGuinness, this exciting and unusual Spider-Man saga is currently unfolding in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, starting in last week's Amazing Spider-Man 61. I feel like it's kind of selfish of me to just sit there and talk about how great Ed McGuinness' art on Spider-Man is, because he's just illustrated so many issues of the series at this point. There's still something magical about watching like his rendition of Spider-Man's brand new suit for 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, and the way he's able to lay out pages is just absolutely fascinating. One thing about Amazing Spider-Man that I think has brought the series down a couple pegs is just the sheer amount of text that Joe Kelly has brought to the series to date. I think this series would definitely be a little bit more approachable to newer readers if they were able to pare down that dialogue just a little bit. I'm hoping that Marvel will go in that direction, but we'll be able to see moving forward here. Oh, nobody except me has some commentary on the DC meta that we were talking about a little earlier. Let's check in on what he has to say. Yeah, DC feels like it just had a lot of Ultimate style universes in short runs, followed by big resets that either restart or bring back what was just thrown out. Yes, yes. For me, one of the absolute, most devastating parts of DC Comics recently was just Yara Flor. I think Yara Flor is so compelling as a character. Um, and just the fact that she's not featured like in the main line heavily, I think is a real shame. I feel like she's a character that could probably be featured across a lot of different mediums. And I just wish DC would put more time, that they'd invest more into some of these other figures. Overall, though, every time I read a DC comic book, I usually still find something positive to say. It's just an overall direction of the line that definitely has me sticking closer to Marvel. It's amazing how much shared continuity there is between these Marvel comic books. I can't quite think of another series in publication that has like this many disparate installments that's connected between so many different comic book series. I mean, like, take a look at this cover that we have on the screen. It not only features Spider Man, not only features Juggernaut, but figures that you never expect to see together, like Quentin Quire and Magic, especially with figures like Temper teaming up with Spider Man. I think watching some of these new character excuse me, I think watching some of these new character relationships form with these different teams or just different status quos for Spider-Man makes the Marvel universe feel a lot more compelling. And I once again just hope they continue moving in this direction. It's got me more invested in the line than I felt in quite a long time, I feel. Okay, equipped with a mystically powered new suit and extra lives, Spider Man battles against the Scions of Sidorak. These godlike beings are really excuse me, these godlike beings are really putting Spidey through the ringer, but helps arrive from an unlikely source, the unstoppable Juggernaut. Can Sidorak's favorite host turn the tide of this terrifying trial? Yeah, another really intriguing element for Amazing Spider Man is how it's been able to tie some of the cohesion between Juggernaut and Sidorak, who I believe Juggernaut's powers are based off of. At one point, there should have been a collision course across these two titles, and I'm happy that Marvel was able to see that, of course, before Amazing Spider Man's Eight Deaths of Spider Man story officially winds down. See Juggernaut and the X-Men join the fight in Amazing Spider-Man 67 and 68 by Superstar Guest Team. This one actually features writing not from Joe Kelly, but from Justina Ireland and Andrea Briccardo. These are both writers that I believe I've read in other stories in the Marvel Universe. I'm curious to see how much of that dialogue and how much of that humor they're going to be able to carry over from Joe Kelly and what the future of Spider-Man holds. I especially am curious to see what Spider-Man is going to do moving forward after the Eight Deaths of Spider-Man arc, and if Doctor Doom has continued to be working with Spider-Man as closely as he is right now. Spidey is on his last life. After he takes his final fall, the X-Men are left to finish what he started with disastrous results in Amazing Spider-Man 68-point deaths by two industry greats, writer Christos Cage and artist Mark Buckingham. It's really hard to find, new and captivating things to say about Mark Buckingham's art. I've loved him for such a long time. I've read so many disparate chapters of that Fable series, and just like the mythical and like storytelling approach that he takes to so much of his art is just endlessly intriguing. I love some of those first couple pages he drew in Joe Kelly's run in one of those final issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Man, I'd love to see him draw a couple more mainline issues of the series. At one point, I think it'd even be cool to see him tell like a long, cohesive run on Amazing Spider-Man. I just feel like his artwork looks like nobody else in the industry, period. All right, so this cover that we have up on the screen is for Amazing Spider-Man 67, written by Justina Ireland, featuring art from Andrea Briccardo, and this cover is coming in from Patrick Gleason. With his patron, Sidorak, attacking the world, Juggernaut won't just sit aside, but he's not a solo act. The X-Men get involved to help save the world. Yeah, I think we've said everything about this comic book that I could possibly say at this point, but still really, really cool seeing so much continuity being fleshed out in real time on the page. Okay, this is issue 68 of Amazing Spider-Man with the same creative team of last time, Justina Ireland, Andrea Ricardo, Patrick Gleason. This one's on sale February 19th. The Eight Deaths of Spider-Man continues. The Scions of Sidorak are too much, and Spider-Man has used up all of his lives. Is this the final death of Spider-Man? Spider-Man's confrontation with these Sidorak characters has been really deadly across previous installments. He's been able to dispatch a lot of his foes, but at the cost of his very own life, as we've seen repeatedly. So I'm interested to see how Spider-Man is going to be able to cheat death in this final chapter here of Eight Deaths of Spider-Man, and if there's going to be a compelling story reason, or if it's going to feel like a little bit of a cheat for Spider-Man to just cancel out death so many times in this series. Overall, though, I definitely like the tone and direction that Joe Kelly has with the book. I'm happy to see that after such like a traditional Spider-Man story, we're heading into more of like a science fiction, a more mystical premise. And once again, I'm curious to see how Joe Kelly is going to phase out of this with Justina Ireland. Is the future of Amazing Spider-Man going to be another storyline where Spidey and Doom are really tight with each other? Is their connection going to be severed? And will Amazing Spider-Man just continue to be business as usual following this? We'll probably see here in the weeks and months to come as Marvel starts to solicit some new issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Finally, we have that 68-point deaths issue that we talked about. While I am not a fan of the naming convention on this one at all, I really like the creative team here. We have Christos Gage, who's actually worked extensively on The Amazing Spider-Man previously, with art and cover by the fabulous Mark Buckingham. This cover is so stylized. There's just so much interesting line work in terms of Beast on the page. I'm also loving some of the additional lines here on Juggernaut. And just, frankly, the way the whole line work is handled here. Seeing Mark Buckingham, who's just such a beautiful and just wonderful artist at making these gorgeous figures, watching him take on like the newest continuity at Marvel is a ton of fun here. As we mentioned earlier, I'd really love to see him maybe tell an individual issue and handle some interiors on a main chapter of the series, but this is a great consolation prize. In the meantime, let's go ahead and check in on our solicit. With Spider-Man now dead, it's up to the X-Men to win the day and save the universe. But why are they fighting with each other? I think an interesting thing to talk about before we pivot away from Amazing Spider-Man's 68-point deaths is the fact that Peter looks to be in his conventional Spider-Man suit, and he's maybe going to be at war with some of the rest of these X-Men figures. I'm wondering what kind of plot implications are being teased in the background, and if this one is going to be, really finalized over the course of this one core issue. All right, let's see what's next up. Let's see here. Okay, before we head into the next article, we probably need to take a few steps back and talk about the upcoming issue of Storm. It looks like it has some massive implications for the X-Men, and I'm really, really excited to go ahead and look through it here. This one is coming in from Adventures in Poor Taste, featuring writing from Marewa Ayadeli and some artwork from Lucas Wernack. All right, without further ado here, let's check in on the solicit. By the way, let's give a quick thank you to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting this on their website. Guest starring the Uncanny X-Men, Storm finds her way to New Orleans with Dr. Voodoo. The cost of Voodoo's medical treatment is the loss of Storm's powers for 7 days. Storm seeks refuge with her former teammates, the Uncanny X-Men, but it doesn't turn out to be the relaxing holiday she thought it would. A secret that aches the heart is born, and it sends Storm into the hands of Doom. So in our previous issues of Storm, Storm has had like a really fatal sickness that she's been trying to fix at all costs. At the end of the previous installment, she actually ran into Dr. Voodoo, who said he had a surefire cure for her. Let's go ahead and check in on some of the interior pages that actually shifts the dialogue away from the character of Storm and over to Wolverine, who is teasing just a massive character returning from the Krakoan era. Wolverine takes a big sniff. We hear him snick it with his claws out in the page. And then in this final panel featuring this gorgeous bleed from Lucas Werneck, he says the word Nimrod. Nimrod, of course, has such big implications for the X-Men. He recently killed so many characters as a result of the Hellfire Gala, but was dispatched towards the end of the Fall of X series. However, I'm really waiting at one point for him to come back. I'm also really waiting for Moira McTaggart to come back in the overall series. And I'm happy to see that just a couple months after Krakoa has been sunsetted, there's still all these like really interesting plot threads being teased in the back of the X-Men line. On the next page, Wolverine really pushes down some of his feelings. He's trying to hide his new discovery from Rogue in the background too. As you can see, this is also following the Louisiana team with Rogue over in the main series too. Yeah, also such a great composition here coming in from Lucas Werneck, featuring some really interesting panel bleeds from Gambit and Nightcrawler in the background. Rogue sees a gust of wind and just immediately springs into action, getting ready for the absolute worst. And in this next panel, she's greeted by none other than Storm. I'm sure you were wondering at one point what her overall affiliation like to this series and why it picked up on the Louisiana X-Men. But once again, it's a really cool postmodern way that author Muriel Ayadeli was able to introduce the character of Storm over to that main series here. So really fantastic stuff, really great facial expressions and artwork here from Lucas Werneck. Also, I'm just endlessly intrigued at the tease of Nimrod here. I feel like he's such like a violent figure that has so much, harrowing and bad implications for the X-Men and could really just turn the animosity up moving forward here. Okay, really fun stuff for the latest issue of Storm. It looks like that comic book is teasing some really ambitious new revelations to come here. Okay, I'm going to take a really, really fast break. I'll be back in like 20-30 seconds. Okay, we have 2 articles left today, but they're going to be so interesting. Last stream, we didn't get a chance to talk about Marvel's free comic book day offerings in a ton of depth. I recently did a video about it, so if you're curious and want to see like a more abridged version of me talking about this, feel free to go ahead and pull up our video. But for now, let's see if we can take a deep dive on what Marvel has in store for free comic book day. This one was also published around the end of November on the 18th, coming in directly from Marvel's website. Marvel reveals 2025 free comic book day titles starring the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and more. See what Marvel has in store for free comic book day 2025. Okay, let's just go ahead and talk about this first chapter here. This is Free Comic Book Day 2025 Fantastic Four / Giant Size X-Men issue 1, written by Ryan North, Colin Kelly, Jackson Lansing, and Chip Zdarsky, featuring artwork by Humberto Ramos, Edgar Delgado, Chip Zdarsky, and Iban Coelho, with a cover by Humberto Ramos as well. I'm a little bit hot and cold on some of Humberto Ramos's artwork. However, I think this cover is really staggering, and I think he might be a good Fantastic Four artist as long as he really sticks to some of the anatomy for his core figures. In advance of Marvel's first family arriving on the big screen this summer, Ryan North and Humberto Ramos craft an unusual story in which the Fantastic Four respond to a most unusual interdimensional summons. So, that's all we have on the Fantastic Four portion of the story. And it's very vague. There's so many different characters in the Marvel Universe, teasing the fact that, what words do they use? An interdimensional summons. I mean, it could be just about anybody. So really curious to see who the X-Men are going to go up against and just what and just what Ryan North has in store for the future of the property. However, it doesn't stop there. We also have some X-Men stuff in the back of here. On the eve of the birth of the all new, all different X-Men, there is one extra mutant in attendance. Who is it? Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing can tell you, plus another surprise from Chip Zdarsky. We're simply too good to you. The creative team on this one is amazing, featuring writing from Zdarsky, Lansing, Kelly, and North. It looks like Lansing and Kelly are going to tell a new story focused on the X-Men, teasing the all-new, all-different X-Men. Plus, we have Chip Zdarsky in the background, maybe telling a humor-based story with one of the X-Men characters. It definitely seems like Marvel is teasing the fact that Zdarsky is working on an X-Men series, just by the very nature of this being, Fantastic Four X-Men. Okay, we've talked about some of the writers. Let's talk about some of the artists. Humberto Ramos must be drawing the Fantastic Four story with Ryan North. Edgar Delgado did some really cool stuff on that X-Men preview that we looked at, but I'm not sure what his artwork looks like in the absence of David Marquez. Chip Zdarsky is, of course, just such a mastermind. It's really cool to see any sort of interior artwork from him. Iban Coelho, I've really enjoyed from the Venom War comic book. He's great with faces and has such like a visceral sense of motion in terms of some of his page design. I'm really interested to see what he brings to this upcoming story. Next up, we have a really, really big anticipated comic book for me, Amazing Spider-Man Ultimate Universe Issue 1. This one written by Joe Kelly, Dennis Camp, and Cody Ziegler, featuring artwork from John Romita Jr. and Jonas Scharf, with the cover from Pat Gleason. Joe Kelly and John Romita Jr. remind us who Peter Parker and Spider-Man are, plus an exclusive prologue to this summer's blockbuster Ultimate event from Dennis Camp, Cody Ziegler, and Jonas Scharf. Okay, let's start a little bit by talking about Joe Kelly here. I'm curious to see if Joe Kelly is going to team up with John Romita Jr. For his Spider-Man story in this free comic book day issue. I don't think we've seen Kelly work with Romita Jr. On the current run of Amazing Spider-Man yet. Romita Jr. right now is a very stylized artist and usually works for stories featuring like the Kingpin or like more crime oriented characters in the Marvel universe. I don't really know if he's going to be able to work with some of the incredibly verbose writing from Joe Kelly. Ultimately, I'm very curious as to how this one turns out. I know I'll probably like the writing, but I'm curious to see how Romita is going to work with Kelly for the future of not only this Amazing Spider-Man free comic book day issue, but for the Amazing Spider-Man series moving forward, maybe after Ed McGuinness is done illustrating some of the main issues of the book. Frankly, though, I think this second one is probably the storyline that we are most anticipating here. Dennis Camp, Cody Ziegler, and Jonas Scharf are teasing a brand new Ultimate event. It looks like this is the one that's going to pit the maker against the rest of the Ultimate Universe that we've been talking about just so extensively. I think Dennis Camp, once again here, has done a phenomenal job in terms of the characterization. I don't really think we've seen him written the maker very extensively. I'm very curious to see how some of his dialogue is going to be for that figure, and especially curious to see how he's going to be interacting with the character of Doom, Reed Richards, in the Ultimate Universe moving forward. Cody Ziegler, I don't think we've seen tell a main Ultimate series yet, so I think it's going to be quite intriguing to see how he's going to work alongside Dennis Camp. But one part of this creative team who I have no reservations about is Jonas Scharf. Scharf has done such tremendous work in terms of Dark X-Men. I am so curious to see him draw the really foreboding elements of the Maker teaming up against the Ultimate Universe, and really feel like he's going to bring some of that dark subtext that's really going to accompany the story really nicely here. Okay, looks like we have one final comic book to talk about. Let's see. So this is Ironheart Marvel's Voices issue 1. which is really important because it features like really key figures of the X-Men property with characters like Mystique and Storm. Plus, we have Riri Williams and a Ghost Rider in the background there too. This one is also written by Justina Ireland, who's taken charge of some future issues of Amazing Spider-Man, as we just checked out in those Spider-Man solicits. We have work by Julian Shaw, who I've definitely seen artwork from somewhere but can't quite place it. And I think this cover from Edwin Galman is really, really striking here. These are really niche characters, so I'm curious to see like how they're going to operate and if this is really going to be like a cohesive read. Celebrating a year of Marvel's voices with the brand new story starring Ironheart. Best-selling writer Justina Ireland blasts Ironheart into Chicago's past for a story of black innovation through the ages and explore the past year of voices anthologies with selections from Mystique and Destiny's star-studded wedding issue. I didn't get the fact that this Marvel's Voices series is actually going to be featuring like some excerpts from that Kieran Gillen Destiny Mystique issue. I wish Marvel Comics would just create new content, especially because I'm really curious as to what the future of Mystique and Destiny is going to look like in the Marvel Universe. But I guess we're just going to have to preview that in Declan Shalvey's really excellent Mystique series, which, if you haven't read it, you absolutely should be. All right, what else do we have in this comic book issue? We have Patriot's explosive return to superheroing. Yeah, man, I don't think we've seen Patriot in a long time. I'm curious to see how he's going to work, how he's going to return to being a superhero. And we also have the introduction of a brand new Ghost Rider character. Okay, I was wondering if we knew who that guy at the bottom was or if it's going to be a brand new figure. But it looks like there's a lot to be excited about here in terms of Marvel's voices. We have not only a really strong creative team, but an interesting cast of characters making up the series too. Okay, we're going to go ahead and follow up on yet again another article from November 18th. This one is really, really intriguing, though. It looks like Tom Brevoort is just talking about the overall nature of the X-Men line in the most recent X-Men Monday. I'm particularly interested to see if we're going to get any insights as to what Marvel is bringing after Raid on Greymalkin, and if there's just going to be any information about the X-Men line overall that we're not currently aware of. Let's go ahead and check out the Chris Hassan Adventures in Poor Taste article featuring Tom Brevoort talking the X-Men. Welcome back to X-Men Monday, Tom. The last time we spoke in X-Men Monday 250, you said, I want to sell a lot of X-Men comics. So let's start there. Are you selling a lot of X-Men comics, Tom? You know, that's a very kind of bleak outlook for the overall line of the X-Men. I would really love editorial to say we're trying to make the best series possible, as opposed to saying we're trying to make the highest, selling series possible. But ultimately, if a book doesn't have good sales, I don't think Marvel is going to be able to publish it in the long term. So both of these aspects are really important at the end of the day. Brevoort says, it seems like we're selling a decent amount of X-Men comics. I keep seeing on the sales figures multiple From the Ashes X-Men books being featured like every single week. I really don't think Tom Brevoort is bluffing here. It seems like this line is, really being responded to by a lot of new and current comic book readers, probably even some lapsed ones too. There's no particular public-facing website or anything that I could point out to that's not anecdotal, but even anecdotally, as X-Men and X-Men related issues are released every week, they tend to be at the top of those charts. So it's all good. Despite my best efforts, the X-Men are not finished. Yeah, Tom Brevoort definitely has a quirky sense of humor and, really has an interesting vision for the X-Men line. I'm really fascinated to see just how well it's gone over the past few months here. That's a relief. It's good to know I have job security. Now for X-Men comics, the high volume of solo series was certainly a change of pace. Phoenix, Storm, Psylocke, Magic, and so on. Let's see. I believe we've had the first issues of Phoenix and Storm. I'm not sure if we had Psylocke yet. And then Magic is upcoming with that Laura Kinney book upcoming too. We're only a few months in, but are there any surprise takeaways from this solo experiment? Tom says, I really don't think we've had enough time to really have a particular takeaway other than my hope that it will be successful. I hope that any number of these characters are strong enough to stay on their own to center a title, at least for some period of time. These days, building books that go on infinitely into the future is a very rare thing. I know that it frustrates a lot of readers. Yeah, it really, really frustrates me. Thankfully, though, I really think Marvel, in terms of their cohesion, as we've talked about really, really extensively, has done a great job following up on plot threads between the individual comic book runs. It certainly frustrates us in that we would love it. It would be super easy if I could launch 6 books and those books would just run forever and they would have enough readership and be self sustaining. Man, if that's what he wants to do, why doesn't he just do it? Why doesn't he just have like 6 books that are really, really important to the core line that have, maybe crossovers or special issues? Even though I really, really love the X-Men from the Ashes line, there are just so many comic books. It's really hard to recommend it to somebody and give enough like overall series so that they're able to like comprehend and get like a more clear vision of where the overall line is going. Like if you're only reading the main X-Men series, I don't think Raid on Greymalkin is going to be well, it'll definitely be fun, but you won't get the full experience out of it. To really get that full experience out of Raid on Greymalkin, you're going to have to read at least 2 X-Men series. It's a tough market. It's a tough entertainment landscape because there are so many options and so many things vying for people's attention, time, and money. But again, my hope is that at least some of these things will hit and connect. I kind of plan on keep doing them because I don't want that. Just every time a leaf falls from a tree, establishing another X-Men team is a great way to go about things. At this point, I really don't think it would be a good idea to introduce any additional X-Men teams. I know that Free Comic Book Day issue was teasing the all new, all different X-Men. I mean, maybe like over the course of the next year, we can get one more, but after that, they should probably stop just to make sure the line isn't super, super bloated. Maybe there's more strength in having 5 different characters in a book, so the fans of all 5 can show up to check in or whatnot. But I find that a lot harder and a lot more difficult to create legitimate reasons for these particular characters to all be doing the same mission together that's not exactly like the mission the other characters are doing over here. To be fair, with the animosity between Rogue and Cyclops, at least like these 2 disparate teams of X-Men feel like different from each other and separate from each other. I can't say the same about like every single comic book, but at least, these 2 series seem like they have their own sense of identity. It's a lot easier to focus in on solo players and go, okay, what is Psylocke about? What's the tone of that character? And how can she make it different from the other books in the line? What ground does she stand on? What history does she have? What conflicts relate to her differently than the Art of Magic, Phoenix, or Storm? I kind of knew from the jump that we were going to launch a whole bunch of stuff and not all of it was going to stick. Man, it's just the way Marvel does things. I mean, you're sending books out that aren't going to find an audience initially, that you're going to have to cancel. I mean, I feel like if you were planning things a little bit better, you probably wouldn't run into that issue overall. It's definitely dismaying to hear Tom Brevoort have this sort of like defeatist attitude when he reflects on like how his strategy is for the X-Men line. Like in Krakoa, there were a lot of comic books, but I don't really feel like a lot of those books were really stepping on each other's toes. And I think a lot of them did a really great job like reinforcing the overall nature of the line. It felt like they were all really, really important to each other. I wish Tom Brevoort would have that same sense of attitude in making sure that like none of these series get canceled and they all find their respective audience. My metric is always, I do think these projects are good. Jeez. Like, at the bare minimum, I hope you think these comic books are good. I hope you're not launching anything that isn't good. What a weird thing to say. I've done plenty of books over the years, and some of them have lasted a long time, and some of them have lasted a short time. But that's not really how I remember them. I remember the ones that were great, and I remember the ones that fell apart and didn't work well. So I'm judging this by the same metric that the X fans might be, which if all is to say I haven't learned anything yet, maybe by X-Men Monday 300. I do feel like a lot of these solo series have helped a lot of X fans better understand comic sales, pre orders, and what they need to do to ensure their favorite characters' books continue. A lot of campaigning, it's encouraging to say. Okay, I'm not super interested in hearing Bravewart follow up on that. Let's see the next question. We're about 5 months into the From the Ashes era. What's one thing you assumed you knew about the X Men that's been turned on its head thanks to the creators you're working with or X fans? Bravewart says, I didn't assume I knew anything about the X Men. I've watched it all from afar, and I certainly read the books back when I was just a reader. I've kept up with them on and off during my Marvel tenure, so I wasn't a stranger. Let's see. But I also wasn't enmeshed in that world. It's very different than running the Avengers books or what we used to call the Marvel Heroes books. Part of that is, for the most part, when it was time to launch a new Iron Man series, I didn't have to care about much about what was going on in Captain America, and I had to care a little bit, but not that much, about what was going on in Avengers. These were intended as individual solo titles that all had a common hub, which was Avengers. I am really disappointed to see that Marvel is like trying to take their main, comic book series like Iron Man and Captain America and put them in their own little silo. I think, like, as a result of the most recent Invincible Iron Man working so extensively with the X Men, we got better, more interesting stories. And I wish that Braveheart would be able to use the idea of a shared universe to really tell interesting stories. I think we previously talked about how interesting it is that the current modern Marvel universe has so many different comic books published each and every week, and that a lot of them are like really core to the main line. I wish Braveheart would embrace the things that make Marvel interesting as opposed to trying to push them out. Once again, really, really weird way, to say you're plotting these books when you're ultimately writing them all as a part of a shared universe. Thank goodness. He says the X-Men doesn't work that way. X-Men is all interconnected and has only become more interconnected over the years. So every piece resonates with every other piece. Every piece of it has to be coordinated in a way that's a little bit more complicated than just doing Fantastic Four. Man, what an interesting interview to check out. I'm really happy that Braveheart was forced to be able to work a little bit more extensively in a shared universe as a result of the X-Men. And I really hope that, like, moving forward, Braveheart doesn't stray from this strategy too, because this is like the main thing that makes the X-Men comics feel unique from the rest of the line. All the other characters feel communal, and they're all talking to different aspects of the same experience. It's a multifaceted experience. There's a lot of stories you can get out of the mutant metaphor. But you're making sure that two different people don't want to use cyber in the same month or use cyber in two completely different ways. It's a constant thing that you bump up against. But, I mean, that's why you have Marvel's editorial, right? Interesting. Or maybe so and so wants to bring back a character, and I don't necessarily want to bring that character back in that way or that time. Maybe there's more value in waiting and what we can do for X, Y, and Z. There's a lot more of that involved. So I don't know that I learned it, but I get to experience it, and I'm continuing to experience it as we work out and develop this stuff. In the first Krakoan age, we moved from the dawn of X to the reign of X, and ultimately ended with the fall of X. Will the From the Ashes era eventually mutate into something else? Man, I really hope that it does. I like the idea that we can really trace back some of the individual eras of Krakoa, through these different names for the overall like series. I'm curious to see what Tom Brevoort has to say in response. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that we wouldn't still be using From the Ashes, but editor Darren Shawn wanted to put it on Psylocke 1. And I thought, well, there's no reason not to put it in the issue. Fine, go ahead and do that. But after the initial 12 books were out, these were just going to be X-Men comic books. From the Ashes has maybe stuck around just a hair longer. We really only ran it mostly on the first issues. I'm really dismayed at this answer. I think eventually these Marvel X-Men comics are definitely going to have to pivot away from that tagline and introduce a new one. The fact that he's featured like all these From the Ashes logos on so many different X-Men books has like made the line feel, I think, a little bit more cohesive than it would have been otherwise. And once again, here I'm really curious to hear why Tom Brevoort isn't leaning into that direction that makes the X-Men comics unique from different series. It's a launch title for the new era to differentiate from what came before. But you're not thinking in terms of phases. Got it. Okay, so Exceptional X-Men 1 confirmed Kitty Pryde's bisexuality in Marvel Universe canon. This is something many X-Men fans have wanted to see for a long time. Could you share how this came to be and how it was the right point to make this confirmation? Okay, from my point of view, and from the point of view, much like everybody up here, including the creators, we didn't see this as a big deal. Like you say, we kind of saw that as fait accompli. Man, hopefully I pronounced that right. There are enough scenes and enough moments. People have been talking about this since forever. I don't know that I picked up on the subtext of, Kitty Pryde's sexuality ultimately. I do think it's a great story idea, and ultimately, it doesn't really feel like it's like weighing Exceptional X-Men down, and it feels like it's making Kitty Pryde like more of a complex and interesting character in the long run. Man, it is so fascinating to see how Marvel's approach to Kitty Pryde with X-Men Gold, and then to reference not only Krakoa, but even this Exceptional X-Men series. I feel like Kitty Pryde has undergone like a lot of personal growth. Okay, I'm going to skip through this answer. I feel like we really got Tom Brevoort's feelings towards, Kitty Pryde's changing nature in that first paragraph that we read. Man, I'm loving Carmen Carnero's artwork in Exceptional X-Men, though. Just great facial expressions from the characters. Okay, let's see a fan question for Tom Brevoort. This week's first X-Fan question comes from Liam Ocker, who said X-Men 7 just debuted Resurrection-linked degenerative sickness, RLDS. Is RLDS going to be something that is contained in the X-Men series, or will it have an effect on the entire X-Men universe? I hope this one has an effect on like at least every single character that was in Krakoa. For those not in the know, during the X-Men's Krakoa time, there was a resurrection protocol that was established by like 5 different mutants, so that essentially the X-Men were able to cheat death for a really long time. Unfortunately, the resurrection protocols are now gone with the rest of Krakoa, but it looks like there's an ongoing sickness that's going to be established with this that really threatens to bring down any of the X-Men who've been resurrected from the portal. This is one of like my favorite like meta plot threads that's being retained from Krakoa. I'm a little bit interested to see how Tom Brevoort is going to talk about this in his answer. Brevoort says, just by its nature, it almost has to have a wider effect than just adjectiveless X-Men. I agree. We need to see this in other books. We need to see this start popping up in, the Louisiana X-Men team and some of the solo X-Men series. This has to be like a really big plot element. It has to be a thing that's in play across the line for potentially any person who went through Krakoan resurrection. I had our Marvel Handbook team do a deep dive to give me a full comprehensive list of who was resurrected. Thank God. I am so happy to hear that we are we're getting a list. We're pulling names together, and then we're finally going to be like taking this plot thread across so many of these other X-Men comics. I asked Jordan White for it, and he said they didn't keep track of it. Wow, I'm really surprised Jordan White wasn't able to keep track of some of the deaths from Krakoa. We put some experts on the case, and I'm sure we'll screw it up somewhere because we always screw it up somewhere. Man, I appreciate that honest answer. In fact, it looks like it's not even done here. Theoretically, this is a circumstance that could pop up anywhere. And as the characters say in X-Men 7, they really don't know what it is. They're not even entirely sure what this postulation about is accurate. This is what Beast is working to try and figure out. And he's a little bit hampered by the fact that he's been reset to a much younger period in his life, where he knew less science and less of the developments that have come in all the time since then. But he's still working to figure out what's caused it. Will it spread? Can it spread? Will other people get it? How do we stop it? Is there treatment for it? Is there a cure for it? There's a lot more story to be unveiled. That's really just the tip of the iceberg for stuff but it will definitely be a thing you'll see as we progress. I'm not rushing to get there, but as we go, it'll be a fairly rare thing that's of interest to X Force, X Factor, everybody, and the fairly rare characters who were never resurrected. You're safe until that's not the case anymore, and it turns out that you're just as susceptible to whatever this is. We know very little so far. I think across this interview, this is one of the very best answers Tom Brevoort has given here. Watching him not only take all these plot threads from Krakoa and move it into the main series with all these deaths, but seeing him do like the background research to find like every single character that died in the Resurrection Protocol during Krakoa is such like a monumental task, and really, really intriguing to see it start surfacing not only, of course, in the main adjectiveless X-Men series, but in books like X-Force, the main X-Men series, and once again here, some of those individual solo character runs too. While we're talking about the future for mutants in Uncanny X-Men 5, Harvey X provides a quick glimpse, possibly with a four-armed Nightcrawler, Charles putting on Magneto's helmet, and a female Cyclops. What's going on here, Tom? I think it's exactly what you described. Harvey X has given us a glimpse to a strange future in the images he saw. Beyond that, I would tend to expect that any, some, or all, or none of those things might show up in Uncanny X-Men, particularly at some point in the future, or it could just be an outward manifestation of Gail Simone's growing insanity having to keep up with all this X stuff. I'm going to be honest, I totally forgot about this panel in X-Men, but I'm very intrigued at some of the upcoming plot revelations it could bring with, this female Cyclops and the Nightcrawler with some additional limbs here. It's cool to see Gail Simone twisting continuity so much. Okay, this is an interesting question. At this year's New York Comic Con, X-fan Avatar Kung Yu So said it was revealed that Jean Grey will undergo some changes, and Phoenix writer Stephanie Phillips mentioned Jean would emerge from a psychic cocoon as a cosmic queen. How might this affect Jean's role in the X-Men franchise and her dynamic with the X-Men line at large? Will this new direction see Phoenix eventually tackling stories to do with some cosmic hierarchy or other cosmic entities? Jean Grey's solo series has pitted her right in space, and she's continued to level up her powers more and more and more, especially in the last issue of Phoenix that's being teased in terms of some of the interior pages here. Watching the way that Phoenix was able to dispatch Gore in the previous issue was just a really interesting way to track how much Jean's power has really grown, over the past couple months at Marvel. And I'm very interested to see if maybe the rest of the X-Men are intimidated by just her awesome power. I'll answer that last part first. You'll definitely see that, and probably sooner than you expect. It's hard to give you too much specifics because the actual story in which she goes through the things she goes through and emerges and the way she emerges hasn't come out yet. But you'll definitely see some larger and more well-known cosmic entities. We've already seen a few coming up in solicits, and it's been spoiled that a couple more things are coming up. Thanos is in issues 6 and 7, and the Dark Gods are coming, but also some of the more abstract entities. I'm probably not spoiling too much to say, oh yeah, you'll see Eternity, and you might see the Living Tribunal, and a few others as we go, but it's difficult to really give a lot of specifics, at least until we're on the other side of that transformational issue, where at least there's something I can point to and talk about. Even though Phoenix hasn't yet gone through that interesting, transformational issue Brevoort is referencing here, this comic book has felt really, really important. Just in terms of the villains that Jean Grey has been facing, we have the new foes of like Adani teaming up with existing foes like Parakis. And we also have the Black Order that was teased in some previous issues. We saw Jean reunite with her father-in-law, Corsair. There's just so many disparate cosmic elements teased throughout this Phoenix comic book. And I feel like eventually when we get to this transformational issue, if the quality of this comic book increases, I think Marvel will probably strike gold with this Phoenix series. This is probably my favorite solo series in the From the Ashes line so far for these X-Men characters. You're keeping Jean busy. She's making a lot of new friends. Brevoort says Yes, and without putting a timeline on it, we will see Phoenix interacting with the more Earthbound X cast at some point next year. Good. And I like too that there's going to be some time between that, so Jean Grey is able to get fully immersed in her space status quo before going back and interacting with the rest of the X-Men characters. She won't be completely on her own in space time. We'll at least get some circumstances that will bring her back into the sphere of some of the other Earthbound X characters in a way. X-fan Cyclops Sandwich asked if there'll be any unexpected or twists between characters coming up soon. That's such a broad question. There's almost no way to answer that than yes, of course. Certainly. As we get into Raid on Greymalkin, we'll get to see two groups of X-Men, some of whom have a lot of history with one another, and some of whom who have practically no history with one another. Encountering each other in these new circumstances for the first time since the end of Krakoa, and that will lay out some relationships and begin to bounce some stuff. Seeing Beast interact with Jubilee and Calico in X-Men, the most recent issue of X-Men, was really interesting, especially because this was the first time this new version of Beast has met these characters. We're also building settled touch points between titles and more settled touch points between characters that we haven't seen so directly on the canvas. We have a secret crossover. Interesting. Wow. We've already solicited this and nobody knows about it yet. Okay, wow. All right, Tom Brevoort, you got my attention here. We have a secret crossover between two books that hopefully people will figure out when it happens and go, oh, that's what that's all about. That's fun and kind of harkens back to the reveal of Magneto's kids back in the day. So there'll definitely be some instances where characters are revealing new things about who they are, where they're going, where they've been, and where their relationships are. Gale just turned in a script that starts to delve into the existence of mutants at a time we haven't really studied yet. It's a whole thing going back to like the early 1900s and has bearing on stuff going on now. There's definitely stuff coming up that's new, unexpected, and strange, and hopefully interesting into people's liking. And that'll continue to play out as we all come up with new stories and find ways to bounce the characters off one another. I am so happy to hear this. This is the first time I've heard about this. It sounds like in the tradition of Kieran Gillen, Gail Simone is headed deep into the past of the X-Men property to evoke some brand new plot threads for the line. I feel like Mr. Sinister and the different clones of Sinister that happened as a result of the past of the X-Men was one of my very favorite plot implications from the main Immortal X-Men series, which was like my favorite comic book amidst the entire Krakoa line. So hearing the fact that maybe Gail Simone is going to touch back on that is really, really intriguing. I'd love to see her work with Sinister. I feel like she'd have a really interesting voice with Sinister based on some of the writing that we've seen with her Secret Six run. There's definitely stuff coming up that's new, unexpected, and strange. And let's see. And that'll continue to play out as we come up with stories and find ways to bounce the characters off one another. X-Fan Phil said, you have an excellent Canadian writer on a flagship X title. Is there any chance of Alpha Flight reappearing and expanding on the Fall of X fate soon? X-Fan Cassie was also curious whether any Alpha Flight characters might show up in the future. The people want Alpha Flight, Tom. Well, Jed McKay just doesn't want to write Alpha Flight ever. He's never wanted to write Alpha Flight. He refused. He put his foot down. He was Canadian, so he was easily convinced he'll do that in X-Men 12. Yeah, this cover featuring some members of our adjective list X-Men teaming up with Alpha Flight is really beautiful, really striking here. I love the way that all these characters are looking down at us with some foreboding glances here. Great work from Ryan Stegman. Okay, X-Men Era of Apocalypse teased that Revelation, the mutant formerly known as Doug Ramsey, will return. Tom, where's Revelation? He's coming. You'll see maybe a little bit something in this time slide one-shot in December, but it's just a little crumb. It's a crumb for something that you'll see much more of in 2025. Time slide would be about to look at There's a lot of X stuff, and it's just the natural result of the fact that I put the book out again this year, and I'm mostly doing X stuff. There are a lot of different little X-Men clues, hints, phrases, cameos, tips, and things in that time slide one shot. So if you're an X reader, this year's time list is almost more bent in that direction because that was the stuff I could most immediately make decisions on and get reference for and use, so I did. Okay, so sounds like Bravort is saying this time slide issue is going to be a really important to the Marvel X-Men side of things moving forward. Very interesting question from Adventures in Poor Taste. I have a two-part question. First, how far ahead are you with X planning? Bravort says, before this call, I had just started reading through the final lettering on Magic 1, but I have enough track to go through 2025 and early 2026 in some broad strokes. This basically means I know this happens here, I know this is our thing here, I know this is things in between. These are stories that will happen in all of the books and issues in between, some of which will bubble up and burst into things that will happen here and here, some of which may surprise us. Our 2025 as a whole is largely planned out, and that we know how big things are and that are going to hit in May, July, October, and so forth. And those tentpoles are locked in, and everybody involved knows about them and knows what they're doing in the meantime and can operate heading toward them or heading away from them. That's pretty interesting here. Tom Brevoort has planned the future of the X-Men line at least through 2025, maybe some months into 2026 ultimately. Frankly, it'd be cool if Brevoort was able to get like even more ahead of the X-Men line. I have heard though sometimes when people try and write like too far ahead of Marvel continuity that sometimes something will change in another book so it won't be reflected properly in the main Marvel comic book. I feel like the antidote for that ultimately is for the entire line to plan more cohesively for the long term. After with Steph, when does Time Slide come out? I read an article that said December 25th. Surely not. Let's double check. Man, it still has the branding of 2024. I mean, yeah, this is Marvel's website. It does say it's being published on December 25th. I remember like these timeless one-shots always come out at the very end of the year, and it always feels like a weird time to be picking up a comic book like this ultimately, but I'm still pretty intrigued. Since we have this cover up, let's check out the solicit on this one. Of course, this is written by Steve Fox, written by Ivan Fiorelli. What is the fate of the Marvel Universe? An X-Man from the future arrives in the present with a dire warning. One of mankind's most hyper-advanced foes is eating his way through time, trying to stop the X gene from ever evolving in the first place. Only two X-Men can stop this chronal predator from achieving his goal. If they can tolerate working together long enough, join Bishop and Cable on a trip through futures past, present, and beyond. Your first look at the most unforgettable stories of 2025 start here. So yeah, very, very kind of quirky for Marvel to be featuring such an important issue like this late into the year. I digress. Let's see. Okay, great. So thinking about those distant plans, who are three characters you think will play sizable roles that come to mind? Bravort says, thinking ahead, let me see. I think Miss Marvel has an important role coming up that's very centrally X-related. I am very happy to hear that Marvel is continuing to put Kamala Khan in the spotlight as an X-Men mutant. It feels like her profile has been like a little bit maybe, less core to the overall X-Men line after the Hellfire Gala. So seeing her like helming a really big story in the near future could do wonders for her character. Cool. I think Legion has stuff that's relevant in the days ahead. I don't even know the last time we've seen Legion. I felt like it was probably with a Cy Spurrier comic book in Krakoa. I said so many times I wanted Spurrier to come back and tell new Legion stories. I would just be head over heels if he was indeed, helming the future of this character. The Outliers and Uncanny X-Men. Deathstream is going to get the next big spotlight. I mean, we're going to be peeling back the onion layers on those characters progressively as we go, but Deathstream is the one who gets a first story that's mostly centered around him. I love Deathstream's like really morose sense of humor and all the different aspects he brings to the character interactions between the Louisiana X-Men. I'm very interested to see how he's going to work with the rest of the team and how his backstory is going to be filled in moving forward. Final question. X-fan Professor Louise Hastings was curious, when you call yourself conductor of X, do you mean it in more of a train conductor way or an orchestra conductor way? Perhaps a secret third way. Well, the gig needed a title. Jordan used to refer to himself as the Krakoan Gardener, which kind of made sense. When I sort of settled on conductor of X, I was thinking of both conductors and orchestra. Everybody plays their instruments, but I kind of keep them together. Or a conductor of a train. These books all have to come out and everybody's got to get them done. I have to make sure they get to the station on time, and then everybody's where they're supposed to be on the map. I hadn't thought about it that much more deeply, but you could also say that I'm conductor of X as in the lightning rod. Any decisions anybody makes in the group, people come out and yell at me because I'm at the forefront of that. And it's not like I don't have a voice in these decisions, but every once in a while, somebody will come up with and be either happy or unhappy about something and express that to me. And I start to think to myself, yeah, I'm not really the one you want to tell that to. There's somebody else who would either appreciate or not appreciate hearing that, but that's part of the job. I'm also the lightning rod that pulls in everything good and bad from the X community. AIPT, very nice. You need to commission some art as part of Storm shooting lightning at you or something. All right, Tom, is there anything else you want to say? Bravort says, I'd like to thank everybody who's so far given these crazy new titles a chance, hopefully in the rainbow of different styles that people have enjoyed and taken to their hearts. Hopefully, there will be more as we continue to experiment, play around, and try and do all sorts of crazy stories in and around the X universe. Hopefully, history notwithstanding, I'll become better and more knowledgeable at this as I go, so theoretically the best is yet to come. It's really nice to finally see Tom Brevoort being a little bit more humble here. Ultimately, even though his approach to some of the previous Marvel superhero comic books were a little bit dismaying for me to read, as a comic book reader, I feel like he's really starting to get a little bit more used to the really long-term plotting and cohesion of the X-Men line. I hope he continues to lean into all these different elements, like that X-Men Resurrection Sickness Protocol that's been teased throughout so many other books. Okay, we have a brand new Ryan Stegman cover for February 2025's X-Men 11. Once again, super dynamic cover featuring lots of fun expressions for our X-Men characters. A lot of these covers have featured like Cyclops in the forefront, so I think it's kind of cool to see Magic being spotlighted in the center of the issue. And frankly, she probably needs an X-Men issue centered around her. So I hope this X-Men comic book takes advantage of that. I love some of the quirky line work that Stegman is continuing to implement in some of his work too. Okay, let's check out the solicit on X-Men 11. This one is artwork from Netho Diaz, but Jed MacKay writing still. Planetfall. A deadly cadre of warriors pursue their target to Earth. A target making a beeline to the X-Men's home territory of Alaska. But who is this fugitive, and what grim portents do they carry for the X-Men? I feel like this is a really vague solicit, but I like the idea of the X-Men, particularly this team of X-Men, going up against like more alien-oriented characters. In the solicit, they tease that these figures are pursuing, a target to Earth, which makes me think that they could be, potentially from outer space or something. So, I really feel like characters like Quentin Quire are much more at home fighting, weird aliens as opposed to more grounded, Marvel villains. Next up, we have some exclusive pages from upcoming X-Men issues, starting with Gail Simone and Javier Guerin's Uncanny X-Men issue 6. So I believe this issue is actually out now, especially because Marvel is teasing the 7th issue of Uncanny X-Men coming really soon. I do want to say, though, Javier Guerin is such a good artist. He's a lot more stylized than main artist David Marquez, and I feel like is able to render just a little bit more emotion in different circumstances. Frankly, I would love if moving forward, Javier Garrin and David Marquez could kind of both be the main X-Men artists. I think they're each great, but for completely different reasons. And pages like this from Javier Garrin are just so visceral. Next up, we have Mark Russell and Robert Quinn's X Factor 5. I've definitely fallen off on X Factor a little bit. I need to check back in with the overall series, but I think this page is really, really nice. I love how much personality Quinn is able to inject into so many of his figures and different page layouts too. Forge and Friends and Jeffrey Thorne and James Tao's X-Force 6. I didn't talk about this comic book, but I read it and it was absolutely tremendous. X-Force issue 5 had such an off-the-wall, just insane ending that I never saw coming. And I love that Storm and Mystique are really holding Forge accountable for his decisions in the 6th issue of X-Force. This series I wasn't super invested in terms of maybe issues 2 to 4, but now I am so locked in and engaged with this series. I feel like the big, plot reveals that are upcoming for the analog, make this comic book probably more interesting than ever before. So really think author Jeffrey Thorne and James Toe are doing wonderful stuff. Very interested to see where Forge is headed in the near future, and if he's ever going to be able to put, some of the decisions behind him that were maybe ill-advised to rest. A bit more Aurora in this uncanny reunion from Marewa Ayadeli and Lucas Wernick's Storm 3. Very cool to see Storm checking in with the Louisiana X-Men. Storm is a pretty well-liked mutant at this point. So I feel like this team of A-list X-Men are probably still happy to embrace her. However, I think the main part of Storm issue 3 that's going to be really important to the line moving forward is just what's going on with Nimrod. Nimrod is such a violent X-Men villain, and in his previous appearances was so deadly to the rest of the team. I am really thrilled to see him potentially coming back in this upcoming issue. And then we have Declan Shalvey art from Mystique 2. I believe this comic book came out recently as well. It featured great action, great page composition, as you can see here. It also finally did a good job moving Mystique forward and just referencing her family a little bit more directly. If you're a big fan of Immortal X-Men, you can't miss Declan Shalvey's Mystique. At the beginning of our stream, we talked a little bit about NYX issue 6 from Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing. I thought this was a really, really good issue as well. There's a lot of close characterization between Prodigy, Null, and the rest of these X-Men characters. And I think the local character continues to get more interesting and sympathetic as the series goes on. Finally, a long-distance telepathic call between Jean Grey and Scott Summers and Stephanie Phillips and Marco Reno's Phoenix 6. Okay, one really interesting to note about the upcoming Phoenix issues is the fact that Marvel appears to have switched out Alessandro Miracolo for other artists like Marco Rena. This is really fantastic news. It was a little bit hard for me to recommend Phoenix as a comic book series due to some of the tracing allegations that have been brought forth against Miracolo, and I'm happy to see this really, really important book shift artists a little bit. We've gotten a couple instances of the long-distance relationship between Scott and Jean. I like that they just momentarily continue to check in on it, as Phoenix gets deeper and deeper into the run. Even though Phoenix is so concerned with telling space-oriented cosmic stories, I think it's really cool that the character of Cyclops really grounds Jean Grey and Phoenix as a character. Okay, it looks like next week, I think this one is already out, but the next X-Men Monday is for Cable, Love, and Chrome. But for me, I think that's going to go ahead and do it over for the stream today. I want to thank everybody for coming aboard here and checking out our content. I really want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and make sure to go ahead and like the stream. We're definitely going to have a really interesting live stream coming up next weekend, probably around Sunday, probably the same time again here. Elsewhere, I just think the Marvel line right now is absolutely flourishing. If you haven't checked in on the first issue of Raid on Greymalkin, if you're not caught up with the main X-Men series, I really encourage you to do so. There's just going to be so much fun stuff to talk about each and every week as we get deeper into the Raid on Greymalkin. Finally, thank you for sticking with me here. It was a pleasure going through all this news with you today. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.